decided to break that down so you can look at each individual video you want instead of one big video. So, picking it back up from where we left off, we're going to look at carbohydrates. And you've probably heard of these in nutrition as things like pasta, potatoes, French fries. A lot of different vegetables are going to have a lot of carbs in them because plants are storing that sugar to use it for growth and reproduction. So when humans and animals eat carbs, or even plants, plants don't grow carbs for us to use. They grow them for themselves, but we've sort of cultivated them or selected for them to grow the best kind of food or the biggest kind of food. But anyway, in organisms, these are used for fuel, building, and not very much, but they are on the surface of cells as receptors. So what elements are you going to find in carbs? It's going to be carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And in general, they have a formula like this. Now, that might be a little hard to interpret, but think of it, let's expand this out. So if you think of, I want to use a pencil. If you think of this as C, I'm still picking the wrong one. There we go. If you think of this as C, X, H, 2X, and then OX. Whoa. That's supposed to be OX. Sometimes my mouse gets away from me. So if you plug a number in here, let's just go with 5. I'm going to do that down here now. That'd be C5. And 5 times 2 is 10. So H10. And the X on the oxygen and the X on the carbon have to be the same. So it'd be O5. So that's the general rule of thumb for is it a carbohydrate. If it has the same oxygen as it does carbon and double the hydrogen as either one of these. So follow this formula, X, 2XX, and we generally write them with the hydrogen in the middle and the oxygen on the end. So a good example is glucose, C6. So 6 times 2 is 12. So H12, you probably learned this in sophomore biology, O6. So you can put any numbers you want in here, and if it follows that rule, it's going to be a carbohydrate. All right, let's go on. All right. So there's different types of carbohydrates, and they break up into these couple words here. I'm going to talk about each one of these individually, but saccharide means sugar or sweet, I think in either Greek or Latin. I can't remember which one. It sounds like it might be Greek. I don't know. It might be Latin. And I think when you say sugar in Spanish, it sounds similar to sac. All right, so monosaccharides are single sugars. Okay, so monosaccharide, just broke down the word for you there. And they usually contain between 3 and 7 carbons. So using that rule there, you get more than 7, you're probably getting something bigger than a monosaccharide. These can form both linear, so chemists usually draw these like this, where each one of these is a carbon. Some of these are going to have oxygens on them, but they'll be linear chains, or they can be, I'm not the best at drawing these rings, they can be rings, so they can show up both ways. And a lot of times they're rings, and the rings will join together. So if you see these little shapes on these rings, we're going from monomers to polymers. So monomers are the individual chains or individual links in the chain. Let's wipe that and take a look at some of these. Some examples are glucose. They all end in ose, okay? And let me move my picture here. Down there, you can kind of see there's a ring And each angle of that ring is carbon, and the red things are oxygens, and the white ones are hydrogens. So this is in the ring form, and that's glucose. And yeah, they all end in os. Most carbohydrates do. There's some that don't, but most do. And when I teach this class, I like to say there's level 1, level 2, and level 3 knowledge. So level 1 is like everybody needs to know that one. Everybody, you have to know that. Okay? An example would be like what elements are in carbohydrates. Level 2 is it's really good to know. You're going to need it, but if you forget it, it's not going to be good, but you'll probably be okay. Level 3 is you probably won't ever see this on a test, but I'm just going to say it so you're familiar with it. So why do I bring that up? Because this is probably a level 3 word. Glycosidic linkage is a word that just sort of means sugar side. So these guys make linkages on the sides of these rings, and that's what we call these, glycosidic linkages. Let's look at a picture of it. So let me get me out of the way. If you look over, if you look over here, you're going to see rings, okay? And these rings have, look here, what's coming out of this? We have water coming out. And so that's going to be a dehydration reaction. And when we're done with that, see this O right here? This O right here is the same one over here. It just grabs on to the next glucose, okay? And we have a whole new sugar. This is glucose plus glucose. If you ever eat juicy fruit gum, it has a sort of glucosey taste. That yellow, that gum that's been around forever in a yellow package. But if you add those together, the sugar gets an entirely different taste. You get what's called maltose, which is what's inside of malted milk balls or Whoppers. If you've ever gone to like ice cream shop and gotten a malted, a chocolate malt, it's like a milkshake with some extra of this sugar in it. And some people will even mix it up and make something similar to chocolate milk. And some people will ferment it and make something called malt liquor. So you can do a lot with this, but my point here is it has a totally different taste than these glucoses. And I don't know how to describe the taste other than malty. It's just kind of a stronger sort of, I don't know, it's kind of like a grain taste is the best thing I can come up with. And if you want to take these apart, you can take, here's just another, this is not coming apart. This is another dehydration. Glucose plus fructose equals sucrose. And this is the white stuff that we put in our coffee and maybe on our cereal and stuff like that. So this is what you put in the chocolate chip cookies. And this is what you put in your chocolate malt. All right, let me go on to the next. And so there's a couple examples of disaccharides where you're just putting a couple. You don't have to memorize this. This is level 3 stuff. Level 1 and level 2 is 2 sugars together makes a polymer called a disaccharide. So you need to know that. Next you have oligosaccharides. Oligo means a few. This is a level 3 word. You don't see this oligosaccharide very much. After you get bigger than 10, you're going to call it a polysaccharide. If you remember from maybe like social studies, an oligarchy is ruled by the few. So we have a few sugars. All right. Let's go on to polysaccharides. This is anywhere from 10 to millions, okay? So you're joining all these simple sugars together, making these really, really long chains. And these things make molecules you've probably heard of before, starch, okay? Humans can break down starch, like French fries. A lot of grains are full of starch. Cellulose, humans cannot break it down, but a lot of grazing animals can, and termites. So things like herbivores that eat grass are really, grass is mainly made out of cellulose. And when humans eat cellulose, it just becomes fiber. So it makes you poop a lot. So a food with lots of cellulose would be something like celery or I don't know, a cucumber. So glycogen, we're going to talk a little bit about later, is sort of like the human version of starch. These are energy storage, glycogen and starch. Cellulose is structure, but we're gonna talk about all those here in a sec. So let's not get too deep into that. Okay, so we have some examples of starch. So each one of these little tiny green shapes is a single sugar. And you chain these up, and then the chain makes a spiral. And just like DNA, we call that a helix. And the chains will form, sometimes they'll form side chains. So these are still ending in os because they're carbohydrates. But here's one that doesn't, amylopectin, which is something you can use to make jelly with. But anyway, let me wipe the screen off. Glycogen has a lot more side chains than starch, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. Just some examples. This is one of those level 3 things. There are sometimes what are called isomers of sugars, and these have the same chemical formula, C6H12O6. If you count those up, they'll be the same. But on this one, the OH is facing next to this OH, and on this one, the OH is facing up. Now, one of these makes starch, and the other one will make cellulose. So I'll show you how that works in here. You don't have to know too much about that, but we'll just take a look at this. Okay, so starches use beta glucose and alpha glucose. Starches use alpha glucose. That's the Greek letter A right there. Kind of looks like a cursive A. And cellulose, which is found in things like plants, use beta. And all you're seeing here is this OH always facing down on starch, and on cellulose, it's like every other one. So what am I talking about? I'm going to highlight it. These are all facing the same way, and these are sort of alternating back and forth. So what does that matter? Okay, it affects the way this folds up. Okay, and so if you think about cellulose, wood is cellulose, plant fibers are cellulose, very tough, very strong, cannot be digested by most carnivores and a lot of omnivores. I mean, we can eat it, we just don't get any energy out of it. That's why people say celery has negative calories, because it's mostly cellulose and water, and it takes more calories to chew it up and push it through your body than you get out of it. It might have a few sugars in it. So starch, I don't know why, but my alpha went all the way out here. Starch is made out of linking alpha glucose, and it makes a spiral helix like I showed you before. We can eat it. It's food storage in plants, and it generally tastes good. These long chains take your body longer to digest, so starch will, some people call it carb loading. Starch will stay in your body a lot longer and keep you sort of energized a lot longer, because they break down a lot slower compared to like glucose going straight into your body. It really it really burns up quick. That's why if you eat a sugary breakfast, you don't stay full very long. So a Pop-Tart's not going to last you very long compared to, like, I don't know, a bowl of oats with a protein. Alpha, you can kind of see its form here. This is pretty technical. I'm not too concerned about it. Cellulose, here's the Greek letter B. It's made of linking glucose. So they have the same raw ingredient, just a different isomer. This linkage makes these guys form straight lines that wrap up into fibers. and they make plant cell walls, which is basically what wood is. So, we can build a house out of wood, and, you can't build a house out of sugar. So totally different digestion. Here is an example of beta glucose. It just looks slightly different than the other one. You got to be a really well-trained chemist to spot the difference. But this is the thing that I want you guys to know. If you look up here, I should say here, let's make that here, you can see that these make chains that have side chains, and these form together and make fibers. These are all going to wind up together, and this is on the molecular level. So when you get a lot of these together, they make, this is looking through an electron microscope, so they make these little fibers here that make plant cell walls. And when the tree dies or whatever, this all dries out in here, but this remains. And wood can keep its strength for hundreds of years. And if you look at all these side chains linking together, that kind of makes sense. All right, I know this is getting long, but this is a tough subject, so stick with me. So we talked a little bit about this already, but most organisms can digest starch, okay? Horses can eat starch, they can eat cellulose, but humans can only eat starch and cannot digest cellulose. We've talked a lot about that. So why am I sort of like spending a lot of time on this? The way these things structure changes their function. If you have something that can form all these linkages, it becomes much stronger. So the structure on the molecular level changes its function in organisms. So structure and function are big themes in this class. All right, glycogen is a little bit different than the other two. Some people call this animal starch, and humans and all animals that have muscles store glycogen in their muscles. It's also found in your liver. This will give you a burst of energy for about 5 or 6 seconds. After you run out of that, your body has to switch over to cellular respiration, and you cannot work as fast. If you're a runner, you've probably seen runners, if you're a distance runner, you've probably seen runners that like really hit it hard at the beginning and then they slow down. It's because they're out of glycogen and they have to switch to cellular respiration. If you're a sprinter, you only pretty much use glycogen, and you can't keep that speed up for more than 100 meters, 200 meters. Sprinters rely almost entirely on glycogen to get their race done. And then there are athletes that are kind of in the middle. So like a football play, the average football play is probably less than 10 seconds. And so a football player will go out there in a burst, and then they have some time to recover. Toward the end of the game, their glycogen might not be able to recover as quickly. So you might see them get a little bit more tired at the end of the game. That's why going into overtime is so tough. All right, so here is starch over here, and here is glycogen over here. And sorry, I'm really starting to pick up on this thing. Starch makes spirals that we call a helix, and glycogen has all these branches. And when you digest this, you start cutting it up. So the more branches it has, the easier it is to cut up. And it's for cutting this up into individual sugars that you turn into ATP allows you to get to it quick. So all that branching gets to it quick. So there's structure and function again. Long-term storage for plants, short-term storage for humans. So that's why we don't store starch in our muscles. We have something totally different. All right, so this is the next section on lipids, so I'm going to back it up and end it here today. So this is just carbs. I'll do another video on lipids.